What does it really mean to be free? Are our choices entirely our own, or are we merely playing a role written by someone else? Have you ever caught yourself acting a certain way just to please someone or avoid judgment? Jean-Paul Sartre, the father of atheistic existentialism, claimed that freedom is not something we receive but something we are. However, he also said that this freedom can be terrifying. There is no predefined essence telling us what we should be. If there is no purpose imposed by a higher entity, then we alone are responsible for creating meaning in our existence. Sounds liberating, right? But it can also be overwhelming. If no one tells us what to do, then every choice we make completely defines us. We can't blame God, society, our parents, or random chance. There is no pre-written script, which means there are no excuses. Imagine being born as a blank canvas. Unlike a fork or a train, which have a defined purpose from the moment they are created, humans are not born with an instruction manual. A fork exists to serve as a utensil for eating. If it fails at that, it's a bad fork. A train exists to transport people and cargo. If it fails at that, it's a bad train. But what about us? Can we be good or bad human beings based on some external purpose? Sartre says no. There is no ideal model of a human being to follow. There is no innate function we must fulfill. I exist first, and only then do I determine what I am. This means I am not condemned to be something I did not choose, but it also means I cannot hide behind excuses or predetermined destinies. However, there's a problem. Even though we are naturally free, we live surrounded by expectations. Parents, teachers, friends, romantic partners, and society as a whole all project an image of what we should be. Since childhood, we've heard phrases like, "Be a good son," "Follow this career because it makes money," "Don't do that or people will judge you." Little by little, we start shaping our identity based on how others see us. And this is where the great contradiction happens. Sartre said that others can become a distorted mirror, trapping us in roles we didn't always choose consciously. The moment we care more about how we are perceived than about who we truly are, we lose our authenticity and start living a lie. Think about how many times you've suppressed a desire or stayed silent just to avoid conflict or judgment. How many decisions have you made not because you truly wanted to, but because it was expected? How many versions of yourself have you created to please different groups? Sartre called this bad faith, a concept we will explore further. Sartre famously said, "Hell is other people." But do we need to escape others to be free? Or is true freedom only found when we face this external influence without letting it define us? This video is an invitation to take a deep look at your existence. If you feel like you're living a life shaped by others, if you feel the weight of invisible expectations guiding your choices, then maybe it's time to ask yourself, who is really in control of my life? Because if man is nothing but what he makes of himself, as Sartre said, then the most important question isn't who am I, but rather, who do I choose to become? Jean-Paul Sartre wasn't born a revolutionary philosopher. He was shaped by his experiences just like any of us. His story begins with an absence. His father died when he was just a baby, leaving him with only his mother and the strict influence of his grandfather. This had a profound impact on his worldview. Growing up in a bourgeois and traditional environment, Sartre quickly realized that the values he was taught were nothing more than social conventions. The hypocrisy and conformity of society deeply bothered him. He rejected religion, traditions, and even the family structure that tried to impose a predetermined path on him. Sartre wanted one thing: absolute freedom. In his youth, while studying philosophy in Paris, he found the foundations for what would later become existentialism. Inspired by the thoughts of philosophers such as Søren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Edmund Husserl, Sartre began questioning what it means to exist. Kierkegaard, for example, had already spoken about the anguish of freedom, the fear of not having a predefined path. Nietzsche, on the other hand, proclaimed the death of God and the necessity of creating our own values. And Husserl introduced phenomenology, which would influence Sartre by asserting that consciousness is always directed towards something external. It never exists in isolation like an object. But Sartre took these ideas even further. He proposed a radical principle: existence precedes essence. This means that we are not born with a purpose or a fixed identity. First we exist, then we create who we are. For many, this idea can be unsettling. If there is no predefined essence, it means we are responsible for everything we do. There are no excuses, no determinism, no predetermined fate. This can be liberating, but it can also be terrifying. Sartre delved deeper into his philosophy in works such as Being and Nothingness and Existentialism is a humanism. He also used literature as a way to explore these ideas, as seen in his novel Nausea, where the protagonist realizes that the world around him is absurd and devoid of meaning. But Sartre was not just a theoretical thinker. He lived his philosophy. Alongside Simone de Beauvoir, his partner and one of the greatest feminist philosophers of the 20th century, he embraced a life that defied all traditional norms. He refused to marry, rejected conventional monogamy, and was actively involved in politics, supporting causes he believed were just. Sartre believed that existentialism was not just an intellectual exercise, but a way of living. He argued that every choice we make defines us. Every decision, no matter how small, is an act of creation. But if we are truly this free, why do so many people feel they have no control over their own lives? Why is it so common to see people stuck in empty routines, jobs they hate, and unhappy relationships? The answer lies in how we deal with freedom. For Sartre, absolute freedom was not just a privilege, it was also a burden, and many were not prepared to carry it. Have you ever felt like your life follows a script you didn't write, as if you were playing a role imposed on you before you even understood your own desires? Sartre warns us about an uncomfortable truth. There is no script. There is no pre-written destiny. There is no essence waiting to be discovered. The only certainty we have is that we exist, and from this existence we are free to define ourselves. But this freedom doesn't come without a cost. Imagine you are on a stage, but without a script, without direction, without anyone telling you what to do. You can be any character, follow any path. Sounds exciting, right? But now, imagine the theater is packed with spectators waiting for you to make a decision. What do you do? How do you choose? This is the human condition, according to Sartre. We exist first, and then we choose who we will become. Unlike a fork or a train, which are created with a predefined function, a human being has no inherent purpose. There is no divine plan, no absolute rules, no universal truth to follow. There is only the freedom to choose, and the responsibility for those choices. This means that every little decision we make is an act of creation. When we choose a path, we are defining our identity. Sartre wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself, and that changes everything. There are no more excuses. You can't blame your past, your family, your culture, or anything else for who you are. You are the result of the choices you make, but there is a dark side to this freedom. If there are no predefined rules, if no meaning is imposed from the outside, then everything falls on us. The weight of our own existence can be unbearable." Sartre called this anguish. Anguish is not an ordinary fear. It's not the fear of the dark or the unknown. It's the fear of freedom itself, the fear of realizing that there are no excuses, that we are solely responsible for our own lives. And when faced with this abyss of freedom, many people choose to run away. They create justifications to avoid deciding. They cling to traditions, social norms, or dogmas to escape the burden of choice. They live as if a path has already been set for them, as if a mission has been assigned by something greater. But this is merely self-deception, because the truth is, whether we like it or not, we are always choosing. Even when we decide to follow the path expected of us, we are still choosing to follow. Even when we refuse to make a decision, we are already deciding. Freedom is inescapable, and that brings us to the big question. What will you do with this freedom? If there is no imposed purpose, then each of us has the chance to create our own meaning in life, not a universal meaning, not a mandatory mission, but a personal significance built through our actions. But there's a problem. We live in a society, and when we are surrounded by people who project their expectations onto us, how can we know if the choices we make are truly ours? How do we distinguish between what we genuinely want and what we have been conditioned to want? Sartre has an answer to this, and it leads us to one of the most powerful and unsettling concepts in his philosophy: the gaze of the other. Have you ever felt watched? That moment when, even without anyone saying a word, you realize you're being analyzed, judged, defined? This is one of the central dilemmas in Sartre's philosophy. The gaze of the other can imprison us. Imagine the following scene. You're alone in a room. You can act however you want with no restrictions, but suddenly someone enters and watches you. The moment their gaze fixes on you, something changes. You become aware of yourself in a different way. The way you see yourself is now influenced by the presence of this other person. You are no longer just you are what the other sees in you. This phenomenon is what Sartre calls the look. We look at others the same way we look at objects. When I see a chair, I know it has a function, an essence. But when I am being watched, I realize that, to the other, I also become an object. I turn into something that can be defined and interpreted externally. My freedom begins to be shaped by how I am perceived. Sartre expressed this idea in a brutal way in his famous play, No Exit, where one of the characters concludes, "Hell is other people." Does this mean Sartre hated people? Number. But it does mean that the moment someone looks at me, they turn me into something fixed, an identity shaped by their expectations and judgments. I am no longer a free being. I become a role. Think about how this happens all the time. You feel the need to act a certain way because your family expects it from you. You hold back your opinions to avoid being judged at work. You choose your clothes, words, and actions not because you truly want to, but because you want social acceptance. Little by little, we start playing roles, shaping our actions to match what others expect from us. And in the middle of this game, a big question arises: are we still ourselves? The danger of the gaze of others is that it can trap us in false identities. You may end up living not as who you truly are, but as what others have defined for you. And the more you try to escape from this, the more you feel the weight of these expectations. If you choose not to follow society's traditional path, the questions start pouring in. Aren't you thinking about your future? Isn't that irresponsible? Shouldn't you be more like so-and-so? The gaze of others creates this invisible prison where any attempt at authenticity can be suffocated by the need for acceptance. But Sartre offers us a way to escape, to acknowledge the gaze of others but not let it define us. He doesn't suggest that we live in isolation, ignoring other people. On the contrary, living in society is inevitable, but he encourages us to become aware of this influence and constantly ask ourselves, is this choice truly mine, or am I just conforming to an expectation? In the end, hell isn't other people because they are evil or oppressive. Hell is the way we allow ourselves to be defined by their gaze. And when we run from our freedom, when we let society choose for us, we fall into what Sartre called bad faith, the lie we tell ourselves to avoid the anguish of being free. Have you ever found yourself saying, I have no choice, when faced with an uncomfortable situation? Have you ever justified a path in your life with a simple, that's just the way things are? If so, Sartre would say, you're living in bad faith. Bad faith isn't just a lie we tell others. Above all, it's a lie we tell ourselves to escape the responsibility of being free. Because let's be honest, being truly free is terrifying. If you accept that there's no predetermined fate, that no one but you is deciding what to do with your life, then everything falls on your shoulders. Every decision is yours. Every mistake is yours. There's no one else to blame, and that creates anguish. To escape this anguish, many people fall into bad faith. In other words, they pretend they aren't free. They convince themselves that they're trapped in unchangeable circumstances and that their choices have already been made for them. Think of an unhappy worker who stays in a job they hate but justifies it by saying, I have to pay the bills, I have no other option. Sartre would say, that's bad faith. Of course, paying bills is necessary, but saying there's no choice is an illusion. There are always choices. They can look for another job, change careers, live more simply, start their own business. The options may be difficult, but they always exist. The problem with bad faith is that it makes us feel comfortable. It shields us from the weight of freedom. Because if we convince ourselves that we're just cogs in a system, that we have no real control over our lives, then we don't have to deal with the consequences of our choices. Another classic example of bad faith is the waiter. Sartre describes a waiter who behaves excessively like a waiter. His movements are exaggerated, his posture is perfectly professional, his speech is mechanical. He acts as if he is nothing more than a waiter. But what does this mean? It means he's convincing himself that his identity is limited to his profession. He is no longer a free human being, he is a waiter. This is the trap of bad faith. Instead of embracing the fact that we are free to be whatever we want, we hide behind roles. Sartre sees this everywhere. The person who says, that's just how I am and I can't change, to avoid growth. The employee who follows an unjust order because they're just doing their job. The religious believer who follows dogmas without question, convinced that their path is already determined. The man or woman who stays in an unhappy relationship because they believe it's what God wanted. In all these cases, the person renounces their freedom and becomes a being in itself, an object trapped in a predetermined role, like a fork or a train. But there's a problem. Freedom doesn't disappear just because we pretend it doesn't exist. Even when we fall into bad faith, we remain free. And that repressed freedom manifests as anxiety, frustration, and existential emptiness. Have you ever met someone who seems to be going with the flow, but is always dissatisfied deep down? That's because no matter how much we try to deceive ourselves, a part of us knows we are running away from our own nature. The only way to escape bad faith is to embrace freedom radically. This means stopping the habit of hiding behind excuses and taking full responsibility for your existence. It means recognizing that you are not your job, your family, your culture, or the expectations placed upon you. You are what you make of yourself. And that brings us to the final question. How do we live authentically? Now that we understand the weight of freedom, the gaze of others, and the self-deception of bad faith, we arrive at the most important question. How can we live authentically? How can we escape external definitions and fully embrace our existence? For Sartre, living authentically means accepting radical freedom and acting accordingly. This may sound simple, but it is one of the most difficult challenges we face. Because in order to be authentic, we must abandon the illusion that there is a single, universal path. There is no instruction manual for life. There is no predetermined destiny waiting to be discovered. It is up to us to create meaning for our own existence. And that starts with one essential step: taking responsibility for who we are. The moment we understand that there are no excuses, that every decision we make shapes our identity, we stop being victims of circumstance and become active creators of our own story. But how do we do this in practice? Sartre doesn't provide a simple answer, but his philosophy offers some guidance. Stop searching for an external purpose. If you feel the need to find the meaning of life, and you might be falling into the essence trap, remember, there is no universal mission waiting for you. The meaning of your existence is something you create yourself through your choices. Instead of asking, "What is the purpose of my life?" ask yourself, "What do I choose to do with my freedom?" Question all the expectations imposed on you. You are free to decide who you want to be, but this freedom can only be fully lived if you are aware of the forces trying to control you. Are your beliefs, dreams, and fears truly yours, or were they inherited from society, your family, your culture? Every time you find yourself doing something out of obligation, ask yourself, "Do I really want this? Or am I just meeting an expectation?" If the answer is the latter, it might be time to rethink this path. Accept that freedom comes with anxiety. The reason so many people fall into bad faith is that being free is scary. When we realize there are no ready-made answers, that we are alone in building our identity, we experience an existential void. But Sartre teaches us that this anxiety is not a problem. It's a sign that we are alive. The discomfort of freedom is the price of authenticity, and running from this discomfort only traps us further. Live according to your choices, not labels. Sartre rejected the idea that we are defined by fixed roles. If one day you decide to be an artist and the next an entrepreneur, that's okay. If today you want one thing and tomorrow you change your mind, that's okay too. Being human means constantly evolving. So instead of clinging to a fixed identity, "I am this, I am that," try thinking, "I am what I choose to be at every moment." Act, because only action defines who you are. For Sartre, just thinking about life isn't enough. You are only what you do. If you want to be a courageous person, you must act with courage. If you want to be an artist, you must create. If you want to be free, you must make choices. Freedom isn't in thought, it's in action, and every choice we make is an act of creation. Sartre's philosophy gives us both a gift and a burden. Nothing defines us except our own actions. This means we are free, but it also means there are no excuses. Whatever life you are living today is the result of your choices. And if you want to change it, you are free to do so. But freedom is not just something we receive. It's something we need the courage to embrace. The final question is, are you willing to take on that responsibility? Because if man is nothing but what he makes of himself, then the only thing standing between you and an authentic life is your next choice. If you've made it this far, you've already taken an important step. You've faced the idea that your freedom is inescapable. But now comes the hardest part. What will you do with this knowledge? Many people spend their entire lives avoiding this reflection. It's easier to follow a script written by others than to take on the weight of being the author of your own existence. But you're not here by accident. Something inside you already knows there's more to life than just going with the flow. The truth is, freedom can be uncomfortable. But what if that discomfort is exactly what you need to start writing your own story? Jean-Paul Sartre didn't want us to accept his philosophy as a dogma. He wanted us to experience freedom, to feel it in our skin, and above all, to act. Because at the end of the day, you are nothing more than what you choose to be. So I invite you to reflect. Which choices in your life were truly yours, and which were imposed? What have you been avoiding out of fear of judgment from others? If you knew you were completely responsible for your existence, what would you change starting today? Drop your answers in the comments. I want to know what this video made you question. And since you're free to do whatever you want, how about using that freedom to like this video and subscribe to the channel? Not because I'm telling you to, but because you want to see more content that challenges your mind. If you want to keep exploring Sartre's ideas and existentialism, click on the video popping up on your screen right now. I won't tell you what it's about, but I guarantee that after watching it, you'll never see life the same way again. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, only you can define who you truly are.